to Jonathan Taylor. Huge hole. He's at the 30. He's going to go. 10, 5, touchdown. Jonathan Taylor made a man miss the line of scrimmage and then runs it into Pater for a one-handed INT. Are you kidding me? Kenny Moore.
What a play by Nyheim Hines.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Bring the Juice Colts podcast. Well, earlier today, it was announced that wide receiver from the New England Patriots, N'Keal Harry, has requested a trade. Now, if you remember, N'Keal Harry was a former first-round pick a few years ago by New England, 32nd overall in the 2019 draft, and it's kind of been looking like he hasn't lived up to form quite yet, with New England. And so only 23 years old, now will be entering year 3 in the NFL. It looks like he may be finding a new home. And so like we do with any player that potentially could, be a guy that the Colts could look at, we're going to talk about it real fast. We're going to talk about potentially why the Colts maybe would make a trade for Harry, potentially against why the Colts would maybe not look to make a trade for N'Keal Harry. So, Derek, let's start with some of the reasons why potentially the Colts could look to go after a guy like N'Keal Harry. What do you think?
Well, I mean, first we'll kind of just mention the age. I mean,
yes,
this guy is younger than me. He's younger than both of us, which is quite crazy to think about. This kid is, ironically enough, everyone, he has a birthday that is a day before mine. I was joking with Cody about that before we started. But, was born in 97, so he's 23 years old. I mean, that's insane. I mean, the kid is very young. So, there's always still that untapped potential, in an athlete that, a lot of people, I wouldn't necessarily say they had this kid as a solidified number one receiver, but this obviously was one of the top wide receivers drafted in the 2019 draft. I mean, there was a lot of expectation on him coming out of Arizona State. And, I'll let you piggyback off this point. Maybe we can move on to some more points. But you mentioned it, how the idea of a fresh start, is good for a lot of players, and especially for somebody maybe in N'Keal Harry's situation. Because remember, you and I were talking about it off air. I mentioned how, New England's not for everyone. Not everybody thrives in Bill Belichick's system. And, he had to deal with some injuries and some other stuff, which we'll talk about here later. But, not everybody fits in a system for Bill Belichick. And, he could be a good wide receiver in other systems, but, just didn't feel like the right fit for N'Keal Harry right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I feel you there. Like, even with Tom Brady, it felt like he was more of a tight ends quarterback. Like at this point, he used more of his tight ends than he does his wide receivers. So you have to wonder, okay, with how much the Patriots like to run the football, how much was that really limiting N'Keal Harry's production, right? You got to wonder that. Obviously, there are faults in N'Keal Harry, and we'll get to those. But you do have to wonder, man, like, did the Patriots use him in the ways that maybe they should have used him more? You know what I mean? Because he's got all the talent in the world. And this is kind of, can piggyback into the next kind of point. This dude is absolutely talented. I mean, he's 6'4", 225. So he's very similar actually in size to Michael Pittman, which is interesting. He's definitely one of those guys that's a physical freak. And that was the big thing coming out of college. I think coming out of Arizona State a few years ago, people were like, this dude is a monster. Like, he is a monster of a wide receiver. He was like killing dudes in college. Like, he was just insane. And so just to see him not put it all together yet has been actually a little bit puzzling, because this dude was just dominant at Arizona State, absolutely dominant. He had all the projections said he was going to be a number one wide receiver in this league. And so it's just kind of puzzling only a few years later that now, he's potentially going to move on to his second NFL team only in his third year, which is absolutely crazy. But yeah, I mean, overall, this dude has so much potential. I feel like it's just swelling up at this point. And I think this also can lead Derek into another point, talking about how physically gifted he is, he's probably not going to cost a whole lot in terms of his contract because he's only entering year 3 of a 4-year contract, potentially could pick up a 5th-year contract. He's not going to cost that much money in the grand scheme of things when you think about it, man. He's not going to cost a lot for the Colts. We know how much the Colts are going to have to pay guys here coming up real quickly here. But you're not going to have to pay a guy like N'Keal Harry. And, at the worst case scenario, you just don't re-sign him after a couple years, right? And also just from a compensation standpoint, I mean, the fact that N'Keal Harry is requesting a trade, I do wonder how much New England, if New England was going to get a whole lot out of him to begin with, I wonder how less now because he's made it public, how much less they're going to be able to get out of him. So I feel like the Colts could potentially, if they wanted to, obviously, they could get for a former number 1 or a first round pick, for a 4th, 5th, 6th round pick. I mean, obviously it depends what other teams are offering, but
49ers
potentially could get him.
49ers was the first team that reporters have been talking about that's been calling. And apparently it sounds like a 5th or a 6th.
Yeah. So that's virtually nothing for a guy
for a young 23-year-old athlete. Yeah.
That just seems like such a thing that Ballard likes to do. He likes to just tap into that potential of guys because they feel like they have such a great system, and they do. And they have such great, coordinators and stuff that they can coach up these guys, just give them talent, and they can mold those guys into what they want to do. So I think for those reasons, it's like, why wouldn't you take a flyer, a 5th or 6th round pick? I mean, I'm going to be honest, you're not going to get a guy that talented in the 5th or 6th round 9 times out of 10. It's just not going to happen. There are exceptions to that, but it just seems like if that's really all that New England's gonna ask for, and that's the highest, it's worth it in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The possibility of something like that, getting a young 23-year-old for, practically nothing for a wide receiver spot because, in a year or two, T.Y. Hilton's not going to be there. You still have questions about the durability of some of your wide receivers. So ultimately, that's the big question. Do you think N'Keal Harry can provide some more of that depth at that 5th, 6th receiver spot? I think with the potential of his ability, has the potential to eventually be maybe our 4th wide receiver or something of that nature. But I mean, we can go into the negatives unless you have something.
That just brought up something potentially. You mentioned 4th or 5th wide receiver. That could be so good for taking the pressure off of him too, right? He was viewed as a number 1 wide receiver potentially in New England when they drafted him. Yeah. And so to go to a spot now where he's the number 4, number 5 wide receiver, that could just help take that, first round pressure off of him. Kind of similar how we've seen with some of the guys the Colts have brought in. Obviously I know there's some potential bad blood with Eric Ebron and some Colts fans and whatnot, but it was kind of that same way, right? Where Eric Ebron went to Indianapolis and the pressure was so much less initially. And I think that was really good for Eric Ebron in that first year. And he thrived, man. It gave him the opportunity to really thrive. Who knows? Maybe that's the same way with N'Keal Harry here, where he doesn't have a whole lot of pressure and he can really show what he's made of here with Indianapolis. So I think that's another point.
Yeah, well, I mean, couple of those positives as to why you would want to maybe bring in a guy like that kind of leads into a few of the negatives here. Mm-hmm. And, I'll kind of mention the first one. I'll kind of mention 2 because I kind of brought 2 of them up at the same time here.
Right.
The first one is, what makes us think that N'Keal Harry wants to be a 4th or 5th wide receiver, right? I mean, he was drafted in the first round. A kid that was drafted to be this great athlete and be this great wide receiver, and all of a sudden he probably still has it in his head that he could be a number 1 somewhere, just not in New England. I don't know where his mindset's at. I don't know if, ultimately when it comes to New England has the absolute might on where he goes, right? I mean, it's not like he really can do a whole lot to really influence the decision on where he ends up going. But, New England will just take the best offer they can get for him and just put him in a place that's not in the division, most likely. So, there's the question of, does he actually want to be a 4th wide receiver for us right now? Because obviously T.Y. Hilton Zach Pascal and Michael Pittman have higher ceilings and a better are much better now than what N'Keal Harry is right now. And then we have Paris Campbell coming in, who we think can, if he stays healthy, is going to be a really good gadget player. So where does N'Keal Harry fit in the system? That's the first problem. And the second problem was, I talked about depth and I talked about the reliability of our wide receivers. This guy's no exception. This guy's no different. Now, to all due respect to N'Keal Harry, he almost quit football because of his concussion history. He has head trauma issues. Okay. He said that after this, in the middle of last year, he almost quit football altogether. Like said, I was almost done because I didn't want to, potentially put my life on the line one more time. But then, that kind of subsided and he wants to still continue to play. He's had a lot of injury concerns, and especially, we keep talking about the head, man. The head injury thing is so scary nowadays. It's different if guys are getting their knees blown out or their Achilles every now and again or their ankles or whatnot. You can repair stuff like that, and you can, still live on to have a normal, healthy life with those kinds of injuries. But when you're talking about head injuries, man, that's scary. And, to think we already have an issue with keeping our wide receivers healthy, to potentially take on that risk of N'Keal Harry having even more issues with that. I don't know if that's a risk that Chris Ballard wants to take on that.
Yeah, I see both sides of it. Like I do. I see like potential. The potential's all there, but then the injury history especially. Yeah. I mean, that was something we even argued when we talked about Jalen Phillips in the draft, man. That's the exact conversation we had. And that's the reason. It's interesting now because that's the reason why I was kind of out on him. I was a little bit scared about that. I didn't realize it was to that point. I guess I haven't really looked a whole lot into N'Keal Harry. But that's a very interesting point that I didn't realize. So that makes me a little bit more like, I don't know. But I think, for me, it's kind of like how much, I don't know. I'm torn with it now because I'm like, the potential's there. You give virtually nothing. You get a talented wide receiver, but there are negatives with that. And I think it's just, if Chris Ballard does it, it's definitely a risk. But like, I think it's a better risk if it's only a 4th, 5th round pick as opposed to, a high round pick or something like that. But, he hasn't really been that productive either. So let's not pretend like he has with New England. And you brought up a good point. I mean, I talked about how bad, the Patriots passing offense was last year. N'Keal Harry really wasn't that productive. He only had 33 catches for 309 yards. Season prior with New England, he was not that great either. He was kind of a disappointment as a rookie. He only had 12 catches for 105 yards, man. That's more than T.Y. Hilton had in some games this last year. So, yeah. I mean, if that tells you anything right there. So, this is such an interesting guy to me because obviously Ballard and company will have to do their homework on him if they do indeed are interested. But you know what? I'm kind of torn on it. I really am.
And at this point, I think it just comes down to being chalked down for, Ballard a lot of times, outside of a few players, the only reason that Ballard got into a bidding war with a couple other teams for Carson Wentz earlier this last offseason was because Frank Reich told him to have confidence in him. He had confidence in Carson Wentz, and Chris Ballard took him at his word. And he went a little extra to try and force a trade, even though we later found out that there really wasn't much of a second bidder. Chicago was always in that mix, but at that point, we didn't know that. But nevertheless, if N'Keal was a free agent, then absolutely I would say that Ballard would be jumping all over the possibility of getting a guy like this for a couple million and say, yeah, let's bring him in. Let's see what he can do. You never know. 6'4", 225 pounds can be a possession wide receiver. I mean, that's exactly what an offense needs. And for a guy like Carson Wentz to be able to have a big target, that certainly wouldn't hurt. But, when you're talking about, especially with New England, I mean, I got to imagine the amount of negotiation that has to take to deal with New England and going through their system. I could just imagine Chris Ballard just saying, yeah, I'll ignore that drama. Honestly, I don't even see it. I just barely see him making a call. like probably just calling just to see kind of what the offer is. And like, if they have to get into a bidding war for this guy, they're not going to do it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I see it. I see what you're saying. And I agree with it. If he was a free agent, I think I'd be more inclined to say this is more of a Ballard move, but yeah, he's not the type that'll get into a bidding war. He won't panic. I mean, they already have a big possession wide receiver in Pittman. They already have guys that guys they just drafted these last couple of years in Patman and obviously in Strawn, who they just drafted. So it's not like they don't have big body wide receivers. But I think I'm just always so intrigued with just the size and the pure skill of these guys. So I see both sides of it. But yeah, I think you're right here. I think you're right on the nose here. I don't think he's going to make a call. And if he does, and if he gets into a bidding war, I don't think Ballard's going to try to outperform for a guy that's been very inconsistent up to this point, has had some injury concerns. And, who knows, man? I mean, the Colts have already had someone who wanted to move on to other things rather than football, right? And obviously we know we don't want to bring back old wounds here, but how much of that are you willing to bet on a guy like that? That's definitely a point that I think we need to talk about for sure as well. If the Colts were to make that trade, and the conversation, obviously, if they're wanting to go after him, they're going to have as well. But yeah, I think that makes sense. I think we touched on everything around N'Keal Harry, around the situation. Does it make sense for the Colts? So what do you guys think? Do you think N'Keal Harry should be potentially on the Colts radar? Do you think, like us, maybe not? You think maybe the Colts should kind of stay out of that drama, not really be that interested in him? Let us know in the comments below. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Thanks for tuning in so much. And as always, go Colts.